The village lay in the shadow of the great kingdom, its fields cracked from years of war and its homes patched with wood and stone scavenged from ruins. Smoke from distant battles sometimes drifted into the air, reminding the people that safety was fragile. Life here was harsh, and hope came rarely, like rain after a long drought. In the heart of this weary village lived a young woman named Elara. Her name was rarely spoken with kindness inside her own home. To her stepmother and stepsisters, she was nothing more than a servant, a pair of tired hands to scrub floors, wash clothes, and fetch water from the well. Yet, beyond their cruelty, Elara carried herself with a quiet strength that no lash of words could break. Every morning, before the roosters crowed, she rose to the sound of her stepmother's sharp voice. The sisters, Maris and Celine, would stay tangled in their silk sheets, while Elara stoked the fire, baked the bread, and laid out their breakfast. By the time the sisters stirred, the house would already gleam from her labor. Still, no word of thanks passed their lips. Instead, laughter followed her. "Look at her hands," Maris would sneer, pointing to Elara's fingers, raw and calloused from endless work. "She will never wear rings on those," Celine added with a smirk, holding out her smooth, pampered hands as if to compare. They wore dresses sewn from fine fabrics, bought with coins their mother had hoarded from Elara's late father's estate. The colors of those gowns, bright blues, golds, and reds, shone in sharp contrast to the gray rags clinging to Elara's frame, where her stepsisters paraded through the village streets. Boasting of suitors and riches, Elara moved silently, carrying baskets heavier than her frame should allow. Her stepmother often reminded her of her place. "Your father left nothing but debts," she spat once, watching Elara scrub the stone steps. "If it were not for me, you would starve in the streets. You should be grateful to serve." Elara said nothing, though her heart burned. She had learned long ago that speaking back only brought more punishment. Instead, she lowered her head and focused on her work. Yet within her silence lived a fire that hardship could not extinguish. Despite the cruelty, Elara's kindness never faded. When neighbors were ill, she slipped away to bring herbs and broth, even if it meant taking from her own meager share. When children cried in hunger, she would press warm bread into their hands, pretending she was already full. Though her clothes were torn and her feet bare, she carried a gentleness that others could not hide beneath jewels or gowns. Still, at night, when the house grew quiet and only the crackle of the fire kept her company, Elara felt the weight of loneliness press against her chest. She often looked at her reflection in a bucket of water, seeing the smudges of soot on her cheeks and the strands of hair falling loose around her face. She was invisible in her own home, mocked, ignored, and cast aside. But unseen to those who scorned her, a rare beauty lived within her heart. Not the beauty of polished faces or costly silks, but the beauty of endurance, of love kept alive in a place where hate tried to smother it. And though she felt forgotten in the shadows of her household, fate had already begun to stir beyond the walls of that crumbling home. The kingdom's battles were drawing to a close, and with their end would come a man whose presence would shatter every chain of shame wrapped around her life. For now, Elara endured the jeers of her stepsisters, the sharp words of her stepmother, and the silence of her own heart. But deep within her, she carried the strength of someone who had survived storms without losing her compassion, and that strength would soon be the very thing that turned her rags into honor. The war that had long drained the kingdom was finally nearing its end. Whispers spread through the village streets, carried on the wind like smoke. At the marketplace, at the well, even outside the church doors, the same name rose on people's lips: the Masked Warrior. They said he had ridden through countless battles, never once revealing his face beneath the iron mask he wore. Some believed he hid it out of pride. Others claimed his features were too scarred to be seen. Children repeated wild tales that he had the face of a beast or the eyes of a ghost. Yet, no matter the rumor, one truth was certain. His strength had delivered victory where hope had been lost. And now, he was returning. A royal proclamation was nailed to the village gates one dawn, the parchment fluttering in the breeze for all to read. To bind the wounds of war and bring peace to the land, the masked warrior will take a bride. His choice shall be made during the harvest festival, and from among the daughters of this village he will decide. The words struck like thunder. For a people weary of loss and hunger, this was more than news. It was a chance for glory, for wealth, for a future beyond bare survival. Mothers dressed their daughters in their finest gowns weeks in advance. Fathers polished what coins they had to buy silk ribbons and shining shoes. The entire village trembled with excitement. In the stepsisters' home, the proclamation was received with shrieks of delight. "Do you hear, Maris?" Celine clapped her hands, her eyes shining like jewels. "A masked warrior, rich and powerful, will choose his bride, and it shall be one of us." Maris twirled in front of the cracked mirror, holding a gown against herself. Of course. Why would he look at anyone else? She cast her gaze toward Ilara, bent on her knees, scrubbing the floor. Certainly not her. They laughed as though the very thought were absurd, their giggles sharp as needles. To them, Ilara's torn dress and work-stained hands were proof enough that she was unworthy of notice. They saw only rags and shadows, never the courage that kept her spirit alive. But Ilara heard more in the whispers than her sisters did. She remembered a night, long ago, when she found a wounded man at the edge of the woods. His face was hidden beneath a battered helmet, blood soaking his sleeve. While others avoided him out of fear, she had knelt beside him. She gave him water, tore her own sleeve to bind his wound, and stayed until his breath grew steady. He had said little, only a rasped word of thanks, before vanishing into the night. The memory lingered, sharp and strange, as the rumors grew. Could it be that the same man, scarred and hidden, was now the masked warrior? She dared not speak it aloud, for her sisters would only laugh louder. Still, in the quiet of her heart, Ilara felt the faint stir of a truth she did not yet understand. The village prepared for the harvest festival with eager hands and greedy hearts. The sisters dreamed of crowns, their mothers schemed of wealth, and the crowd spoke of legends. But Ilara stood apart, holding close the memory of a soldier she once helped, unaware that fate was already weaving their stories together again. The weeks leading up to the harvest festival were filled with frenzy. The village square echoed with the sound of hammers as stalls were built, banners were raised, and musicians rehearsed for the grand celebration. Everywhere, laughter and chatter filled the air, but inside Ilara's home, the atmosphere was sharper, crueler, and heavy with demands. Her stepsisters grew more restless with every passing day. "Polish my shoes until I can see my reflection," Maris shouted. "Fetch more ribbons from the market, gold ones, not silver." Celine barked. Their mother joined in, her tongue sharper than any blade. "Faster, Ilara! Do you wish to shame us before the warrior arrives?" From sunrise until deep into the night, Ilara's hands never rested. She sewed hems, scrubbed floors, braided her sister's hair, and polished jewelry until her fingers ached. Her skin grew raw, her eyes heavy, yet not once did she complain. She carried her exhaustion silently, the weight of their contempt pressing on her shoulders. The sisters never tired of mocking her. "Perhaps you'll stand in the shadows and serve drinks at the festival," Celine sneered, twirling in a gown of emerald silk. "Or maybe you'll frighten the warrior away with those rags," Maris added, laughter spilling from her lips. Their cruelty cut deep, but Ilara swallowed her pain. She had long ago learned that her dignity lay not in their approval, but in her ability to endure. Still, as the festival day neared, a small flame of longing burned inside her chest. She too wanted to see the celebration, to hear the music, to breathe in the joy that had always been denied to her. One evening, after her sisters had fallen asleep in their perfumed beds, Alara slipped quietly into the old chest at the foot of her bed. Beneath worn blankets and faded cloth lay a dress, her mother's dress. It was simple, not woven with gold or silver, but stitched with care and love. Its pale blue fabric had grown thin with age, but to Alara it glowed like a treasure. Her hands trembled as she lifted it, pressing it to her cheek. Memories of her mother filled her heart. The warmth of her embrace, the gentleness in her eyes, the whispered promise that Alara was worth more than jewels or crowns. Tears stung her eyes, but hope stirred. For nights afterward, she worked in secret. By candlelight, she mended the frayed edges, patched the seams, and washed the fabric until it shone softly in the firelight. She imagined herself wearing it at the festival, not to win the warrior's favor, but simply to stand among the others as someone who belonged. The morning of the festival arrived at last. The village bells rang, calling people to the square. Maris and Celine squealed with excitement, their dresses glittering, their hair adorned with jewels and ribbons. Alara, heart pounding, stepped out from her corner wearing the pale blue dress. It was not new, nor was it grand, but it held the dignity of memory and the beauty of care. For a moment, silence fell in the room. Her sisters stared, wide-eyed. Then laughter erupted, cruel and sharp. "Where did you dig up that rag?" Maris cackled, clutching her stomach. "You think you'll walk into the festival in that?" Celine jeered, her voice dripping with scorn. Before Alara could protest, they lunged forward. Fingers tore at the fabric, seams ripping under their grasp. The dress that had taken nights of quiet hope was shredded in an instant, the laughter of her sisters echoing like daggers in her ears. When they were done, they tossed the torn cloth at her feet. "Now you look as you should," Maris sneered, adjusting her sparkling necklace. "Stay home, Alara. The festival is no place for beggars." They swept out of the house, their perfume trailing in the air, leaving silence behind. Alara sank to the floor, gathering the ruined dress in her arms. Tears poured freely, staining the torn fabric as she clutched it against her chest. In that moment, despair wrapped around her like a heavy cloak. She felt forgotten, unseen by the world, left only with ashes of hope. But as the minutes passed and her sobs quieted, a new thought began to rise. She looked down at the rags in her arms, and then at her reflection in the cracked mirror across the room. Though her dress was ruined, her spirit was not. Though her hands were scarred, her heart still beat strong. A quiet strength whispered inside her, "Go. Even if they laugh, even if you are mocked, you are more than what they see." Alara wiped her tears, folded the torn dress around her shoulders, and rose to her feet. She would not let shame decide her worth. She would go to the festival, not as someone dressed in splendor, but as herself. And with that decision, she stepped into the path fate had been waiting to open. The village square was a swirl of color and sound. Bright banners fluttered above wooden stalls, carrying the scent of roasted meats, fresh bread, and sweet honey cakes. Musicians played lively tunes, their fiddles and flutes weaving into the laughter of villagers. Dancers spun gracefully on the cobblestones, their skirts sweeping the ground, while children ran through the crowd, squealing with delight. Everywhere, young women moved like painted dolls, their gowns shimmering in the sunlight. They whispered and preened, hoping to catch the eye of the masked warrior whose arrival was the talk of every household. Their jewels sparkled like morning dew, their hair braided with golden threads. Among them, Alara walked silently, the torn remnants of her dress clinging to her frame, her bare feet scuffing the stone. She felt the sting of every glance, every smirk, but held her head high. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she moved forward, a quiet dignity masking the whirlwind of fear and shame inside her. Her stepsisters were quick to notice her. "Look at her," Maris hissed, pointing with a manic gleam in her eyes. "Does she really think she belongs here?" Celine laughed, loud and sharp, drawing the attention of nearby villagers. "What a sight! The beggar girl walks among us." The crowd tittered, some covering their mouths in amusement, others shaking their heads in pity. Alara felt the burn of humiliation, but she forced herself to breathe steadily. She had decided already. Her worth was not defined by their cruelty or the fabric on her back. She would not shrink in shame, not today. The murmurs faded as a hush suddenly fell across the square. A chill passed through the crowd as the ground seemed to shift under the arrival of a new presence. From the edge of the festival, a horse's hooves struck the cobblestones with a steady, commanding rhythm. Clad in dark armor that gleamed despite the dust of battle, the masked warrior rode slowly into the center, his figure tall and imposing. No one could see his face behind the polished steel mask, yet all eyes were drawn to him as if pulled by invisible strings. He paused, surveying the women before him. He moved deliberately, his gaze sharp and discerning, scanning the silks and jewels with quiet detachment. Some villagers whispered that his heart was untouched by vanity or beauty. He sought something deeper, something invisible to the eyes but palpable to the soul. Maris and Celine sprang into exaggerated gestures, twirling and curtsying with forced smiles, desperate to attract his notice. Their laughter became frantic, high-pitched, each movement more exaggerated than the last. Yet he did not stop. He did not nod. He did not smile. Nor did he gesture toward the sparkling crowd of hopeful brides. Alara tried to melt into the shadows near a wooden stall, her hands clenching the torn hem of her dress. The whispers and stares pressed on her from all sides, making her stomach churn with panic. Every step forward felt like walking through fire, yet she could not retreat. Her decision to attend had been made in the quiet of her own sorrow. She would face this moment, however unbearable. The warrior's gaze lingered briefly on the jeweled women, but then it swept past them, calm and unflinching. He took a step forward, and every head turned instinctively toward him. For a heartbeat, the festival seemed frozen in time. The music stilled. The dancers paused mid-spin. Alara's heart raced. Her eyes met his for the first time. Though hidden behind the mask, she felt the weight of his scrutiny, the intensity of his presence. It was as though he could see through the laughter, the rags, and the scorn. He saw her, truly, completely. Around her, the crowd whispered, some with awe, others with disbelief. The stepsisters stiffened, their smiles faltering. Their desperate attempts at charm faded under the warrior's piercing gaze. For the first time they seemed unsure, uncertain, powerless. Ilara's knees felt weak, yet she stood straighter. Though her dress was torn, her hands raw, and her heart pounding, she felt a strange calm begin to settle in her chest. She realized she had already won something invisible. The courage to show herself as she was, unashamed, unbowed, and undeniably human. The warrior's horse halted in the center of the square, and all eyes turned to him. Silence fell heavier than any drumbeat, as if the entire village held its breath, waiting for the impossible to happen. And in that moment, the festival, once a place of mockery and fear, became a stage for destiny. The square fell deathly silent. Even the music of the festival seemed to pause, holding its breath. The masked warrior's armored figure stood in the center, the sunlight glinting off his steel, his gaze sweeping over every hopeful maiden. The jeweled women twirled, their smiles bright, their laughter desperate, but he passed them all, eyes cold and calculating. Ilara tried to shrink behind a wooden stall, the torn remnants of her dress clinging to her frame. She prayed he would not see her, that the moment would pass like any other day she had spent in the shadows of her cruel household. But he did see her. His eyes, sharp and piercing even through the mask, fell on the girl in tattered blue. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The laughter of her stepsisters died in their throats. The villagers gasped, some with disbelief, others with quiet hope. The murmurs rose and fell like waves, but the warrior remained still, his gaze unwavering. Maris and Celine froze, their mouths opening and closing like fish out of water. He can't mean her, Maris whispered, her voice trembling. Ridiculous, Celine spat, though her hands shook as she clutched her sparkling gown. The masked warrior took a slow, deliberate step forward. The clatter of his boots against the cobblestones echoed like a drumbeat in Ilara's chest. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he knelt before her. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet. She felt the eyes of the entire village upon her, the sharp sting of shame mingling with an impossible, growing warmth inside her chest. The stepsisters burst into cruel laughter, certain that the warrior was mocking her. "What is he doing?" Maris shrieked. "It's a joke!" "He wouldn't. He can't!" But the warrior did not laugh. He lifted his hand slowly, as though the act itself demanded reverence. "You," he said, his voice steady, commanding, and strangely gentle. "I choose you as my bride." Silence fell again, heavier than the laughter. The villagers stared, some mouths hanging open in disbelief, some eyes wide with awe. The stepsisters' faces drained of color, their carefully rehearsed smiles crumbling into fury and confusion. Ilara felt her knees weaken, and yet she stood, rooted to the spot. She did not understand why he had chosen her, of all people. Her heart swelled with gratitude, fear, and disbelief all at once. Could it be courage he saw in her? The kindness she had quietly carried through years of scorn? The warrior's voice rose again, calm yet filled with power. "I seek a heart that has endured cruelty without turning bitter. I seek a soul that is stronger than silks and jewels. In her, I see truth. In her, I see strength." His words were like fire and water all at once, burning away doubt while soothing the ache of years spent in shame. Ilara's hands shook, clutching the torn remnants of her dress, and for the first time, she allowed herself to feel that maybe, just maybe, she was worthy. Around her, the festival seemed to transform. The jewels of the other women no longer shone as brightly. The laughter of her stepsisters sounded hollow and bitter. Only the quiet dignity she had carried all her life now held weight, now commanded attention. The warrior rose from his knee, offering his gauntleted hand to her. Though he still wore his mask, Ilara felt the warmth and steadiness of the man beneath it. She took a slow step forward, trembling but unwavering, and placed her hand in his. In that instant, the crowd understood. This was no act of pity. This was no random choice. The masked warrior had chosen her because he had seen her for what she truly was. A heart that had suffered and endured. A soul that shone brighter than any silk or gem. Even as whispers and stunned gasps rippled through the festival, Ilara felt a quiet, fierce pride rise within her. She had been mocked, humiliated, and torn down, yet here she stood, chosen not for beauty, but for resilience, not for wealth, but for courage. And in that choice, the first threads of her new life began to weave, delicate yet unbreakable, ready to grow into something beyond any dream she had dared to imagine. The moment the masked warrior declared Ilara as his chosen bride, the village square erupted, not in celebration, but in chaos. Gasps of disbelief echoed from every corner. Some villagers whispered in awe, bowing their heads to the quiet justice of his choice. Others muttered curses and shook their fists, angry that their expectations had been shattered. Inside the square, the stepsisters could barely contain their outrage. Maris's eyes blazed like fire. "This is an insult! A mockery! He cannot mean her!" Celine tore at her hair, her voice high and frantic. "She's nothing. Just a ragged girl. Mother, you must do something." Their mother stepped forward, her face red with fury and embarrassment. "This is disgrace! How dare he humiliate us in front of the village? This girl, this servant, cannot possibly take him." She stamped her foot, her voice echoing over the square, but the warriors' guards moved swiftly to silence her, their spears glinting in the sunlight. Alara felt her heart tighten at the uproar. She had expected mockery, yes, but not the storm of anger and hatred now pressing on every side. Whispers of shame and impossible crawled over her like thorns. Villagers she had known her whole life stared, some with admiration, others with judgment. Even as her stepsisters screamed, Alara felt the weight of doubt creeping in. "Do I deserve this?" she thought, clutching the tattered remains of her dress. "Is it pity that brings him to me?" She could feel the eyes of the crowd burn into her back, as if every heart was weighing her worth. The warrior stepped forward, his presence steady and commanding, cutting through the clamor. Even behind the mask, his voice carried warmth and certainty. "Enough," he said simply. "She has endured what none of you could. Her strength and kindness are why I choose her. This is no whim, this is no pity." He moved closer to Alara, his hand brushing hers lightly. In that small touch, she felt reassurance that words could not fully carry. The tension around her eased slightly, replaced with a sense of quiet protection. Yet the backlash did not fade entirely. Some villagers still whispered, judging her as though her torn dress were a mark of shame rather than a testament to resilience. "She's ruined the festival," one muttered. "She shamed all of us." Others shook their heads at the stepsisters, pitying them for their vanity and cruelty. Alone, Alara felt a swell of conflicting emotions. Gratitude for the warrior's choice battled with insecurity. Pride for her courage mingled with shame at being publicly mocked. She pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the jagged edges of her past, the calloused fingers, the labor, the countless days of scorn, and wondered if this was truly her moment of victory or just another test. Later, away from the shouting and whispers, the masked warrior guided her to a quiet corner of the square. His voice, softer now, held an intimacy that made the world fall away. "You need not doubt yourself," he said. "I see the courage in you, the kindness you carry despite all the cruelty. That is why I chose you. That is what draws me to you." Alara looked into his eyes, unseen behind the mask, and felt the sting of tears, not from humiliation, but from the deep, tender recognition that her strength had finally been seen. She realized then that her torn dress was not a mark of shame, but a symbol of the hardships she had survived. Her wounds, her endurance, her quiet heart, they mattered more than any jewel or gown. The crowd continued to murmur around them, but in that moment, Alara stood firm. She had survived the storm of cruelty, and though whispers and glances still followed her, she began to understand something essential. She was worthy, not because of anyone else's approval, but because she had remained true to herself. And for the first time in her life, she felt a spark of hope that no ridicule, no scorn, and no torn dress could ever extinguish. The day of the wedding arrived quietly. Unlike the bright and bustling harvest festival, the village square, once alive with music and laughter, now held only the soft rustle of banners and the faint scent of incense drifting in the autumn air. The ceremony was not grand, not glittering with jewels or silk, but intimate and guarded, a reflection of the warrior himself. Alara's torn dress had been replaced by a simple cloak that she had wrapped around her shoulders. It covered the worst of the rips and stains, but did not erase the memory of her hardships. She walked beside the masked warrior, her heart beating with nervous anticipation. The villagers watched from the edges of the square, their expressions a mixture of awe, curiosity, and lingering judgment. Her stepsisters had not given up. Maris and Celine whispered among themselves, their eyes sharp with malice. "We will not be humiliated again," Maris hissed. "We will show everyone she is unworthy." Celine nodded, a cruel smile tugging at her lips. She will fall today, and we will see her shame for all to witness. But the warriors' guards were vigilant. Every scheme the sisters attempted, slipping poison into the ceremonial wine, tripping Ilara as she approached, or sending a mocking song through the square, was caught and stopped before it could take root. The stepsisters' plots unraveled, leaving them exposed and humiliated. Villagers turned their gazes on them, some shaking their heads at their vanity, others whispering of justice. As the ceremony began, Ilara felt a quiet strength settle over her. She no longer focused on the judgment of the crowd or the sneers of her family. She thought only of the journey that had brought her here, the long hours of labor, the nights spent mending her mother's old dress, the ridicule she had endured without bitterness. Every tear, every scar, every quiet act of kindness had shaped her. The masked warrior placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his presence steady and grounding. Though his face remained hidden behind the mask, she felt the unspoken connection between them, a bond forged through recognition of resilience and courage. When they exchanged vows, it was not in words of grandeur or poetic flattery, but in promises of trust, protection, and understanding. Every phrase carried weight. Every pause spoke of the hardships they had both endured. In this simple ceremony, their love was raw, honest, and unshakable. Ilara looked around and saw the stepsisters' expressions twist from anger to disbelief. Their attempts to humiliate her had failed. Instead, the village bore witness to her transformation. From a girl in rags mocked at every turn to a bride standing tall, wrapped in dignity and strength. Finally, the masked warrior draped a new cloak around her shoulders. It was not glittering or adorned with jewels, but soft and protective, a symbol of his respect and the life they were beginning together. It covered the torn dress, but the memory of it remained, not as shame, but as a testament to her endurance. She understood then that she carried her past not as a burden, but as proof of her courage and the unbroken spirit within her. As the ceremony ended, villagers whispered among themselves, some in admiration, some in reluctant acceptance. The stepsisters slunk away, their final schemes revealed, leaving Ilara standing proud. In that quiet moment, she vowed never again to let shame define her, for she had learned that strength and compassion carried far more power than mockery or malice ever could. The wedding of shadows had not been a tale of glitter or grandeur. It had been a story of survival, resilience, and quiet triumph. And in the soft autumn light, Ilara finally felt the first true warmth of being seen, chosen, and honored for exactly who she was. The night fell softly over the village, draping the streets and rooftops in silver moonlight. Inside the quiet chambers of the warrior's home, the celebration of the wedding had ended, leaving only the flicker of candles and the whisper of autumn wind through open windows. The air was heavy with anticipation, a quiet intimacy settling over the room. Ilara stood near the hearth, her cloak still wrapped around her shoulders, her heart pounding in a rhythm both nervous and hopeful. For the first time, the masked warrior removed the armor, setting aside his gauntlets, and motioned for her to sit. The mask that had hidden him for so long rested in his hands, gleaming faintly in the candlelight. A hush fell over the room, not because it was empty, but because the moment demanded silence. Ilara felt her pulse quicken. She had seen the warrior command armies and silence crowds, yet here he was, vulnerably unmasked, a man whose life had been carved by battles and pain. Slowly, he lifted the mask from his face. Scars marred his skin, jagged lines across his cheeks and forehead, traces of wars fought both in battlefields and within himself. One eye bore a faint scar that twisted the corner slightly, a reminder of a close call that had nearly claimed him. Ilara, did not flinch. She looked at him steadily, her own hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from awe and compassion. She saw not a warrior hardened by blood, but a man who had endured suffering and survived, much like herself. Her torn dress, the labor-worn hands, and calloused fingers mirrored his scars in quiet parallel, a testament that both of them had been tested, and yet remained unbroken. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy yet tender. Then the warrior spoke, his voice soft, carrying a vulnerability he had hidden from the world. "I have worn this mask for years," he admitted, "to hide the wounds the world would not understand, to keep my heart safe from disappointment, from betrayal, from seeing someone like you and fearing I did not deserve them." Ilara stepped closer, her eyes warm, her heart swelling with empathy. She reached out, brushing her fingers across one of his scars, and said softly, "You have survived. You are here, and I see you, not the mask, not the scars, but you, just as you saw me, even when I was unseen by everyone else." He lowered his gaze to hers, and for the first time, she felt him truly look at her, not as a bride or a symbol, but as a person, flawed, scarred, yet unbowed. Their shared understanding of pain and survival filled the room, a quiet bond stronger than any jewel or silken gown could ever be. The warrior reached for her hand, holding it lightly in his, the scars on his skin brushing against the calluses of her own. "You have endured cruelty, humiliation, and loneliness without losing your heart," he said. "It is that resilience, that compassion, that drew me to you. Not beauty, not wealth, but the courage to remain true to yourself." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of recognition, of connection. In this moment, the weight of years of shame lifted from her shoulders. She had found someone who understood the meaning of survival, who honored her strength instead of mocking it. And as the candlelight flickered across their faces, two people, one in tattered dress, the other in scarred flesh, found a quiet redemption in each other, not for perfection, not for appearances, but for truth, resilience, and the courage to remain unbroken. For the first time, they both removed their masks entirely, not only from their faces but from their hearts, embracing the understanding that love does not demand perfection. It chooses courage, honesty, and the strength to survive. Morning light spilled gently through the windows of the warrior's home, painting the walls in soft gold. The harvest festival had ended, the villagers returning to their daily lives, but the story of the girl in torn clothes and the masked warrior had already taken root in every heart. Ilara and the warrior began their life together quietly, yet with a dignity that radiated to everyone around them. They moved through the days with a rhythm born of understanding and resilience. The villagers watched as the girl who had once been mocked now walked with calm confidence beside the warrior. She was no longer hidden in shadows, no longer defined by rags, but strengthened by the hardships she had endured. The stepsisters, stripped of the illusions of grandeur and influence, faced the consequences of their cruelty. Their plots and malice had been exposed, leaving them embarrassed before the entire village. The mother, too, found herself powerless against the truth of virtue and courage. The villagers, once swayed by wealth and appearances, began to understand that character and kindness mattered far more than vanity and gold. Ilara often paused in quiet reflection, her eyes lingering on the remnants of her old torn dresses and the scars on her hands. She understood now that these were not marks of shame, but badges of survival, proof of a life lived with compassion despite suffering. The memory of ridicule no longer held her captive. Instead, it reminded her that her worth had always existed, even when others failed to see it. Together, She and the warrior built a life founded not on beauty or wealth, but on mutual respect, understanding, and shared strength. Their home became a place of quiet warmth, where scars, both visible and invisible, were honored, not hidden. In time, the villagers learned humility. They came to see that courage, endurance, and compassion were the true markers of greatness. The story of the girl in rags who had been chosen by the masked warrior passed from mouth to mouth, a tale of justice, resilience, and love that transcended appearance. Ilara finally understood the truth that had carried her through every hardship. Love does not seek perfection, nor does it dwell on riches or outward beauty. Love chooses courage, integrity, and the strength to remain unbroken. And in that knowledge, she found peace, redemption, and the quiet triumph of a life lived with heart. From the ashes of mockery and cruelty, a life of dignity and love had risen, a life that proved, above all, that the greatest treasures are not silk or jewels, but resilience, compassion, and courage.